Hello, children. Today I'm going to ask you a very tempting question. What do you think about this one word on your screen? As soon as you say chocolate, some dream of its solid form like a candy bar, or it can be a liquid in the form of cold coffee topped with ice cream. Chocolate ice creams and chocolate muffins. Whatever the form may be, chocolate is indeed an all time favorite for people of all age groups. Chocolates are a sure means of showing affection. If eaten in moderation, dark chocolates have some health benefits too. It is very nutritious. It is a powerful antioxidant. It improves blood flow and also lowers the blood pressure. Dark chocolates also help in reducing the risk of cardiovascular diseases. But all this only when it is eaten in moderation. The chapter that we are going to read and understand today is The Television Chocolate Room, which is an excerpt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a very famous book for children written by Roald Dahl in 1964. We can find various editions and publishers of this book as the following. Roald Dahl was a British novelist, short story writer, poet, screenwriter, and wartime fighter pilot. He is one of the most important literary writers of children's literature. Several of his works have been moved to the big screen, including The Witches and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, written in 1964. Based on the novel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, two movies have been made. The first was made in 1971 under the name Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and the second was made in 2005 with the same name as that of the novel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Let's get to know what the novel is about. The story is about a chocolate factory owner, Willy Wonka, and his search for an heir for his factory. He sets up a contest for the chance to visit the factory. Only 5 people will win, and they can win only by finding one of the golden tickets that have been hidden under the wrappers of 5 candy bars. 4 tickets are found fairly quickly. The 5th is found by a very poor boy, Charlie, who lives with his grandparents. One by one, the other 4 children, except Charlie, are forced to drop out of the tour. All the children will be rescued, but Charlie is the only contestant still standing. When Mr. Wonka realizes this, he explodes with excitement. He tells Charlie that he had won more than a visit to the chocolate factory. He had won the factory itself, and as soon as he was old enough to run it, Mr. Wonka will turn the business over to him. He finally invites Charlie's grandparents also to come and live with him in the chocolate factory. Children, he is Willy Wonka, the owner of the largest and most famous chocolate factory in the world, and he wants to find an heir for his factory. He hides golden tickets in 5 chocolates and sends them all over the world. The 5 children who find these tickets and their guardians go on a tour of Wonka's fabulous chocolate factory. He shows them his latest inventions and discusses how he comes up with his special ideas for making new chocolates. By the time the group reaches the final testing room, only 2 of the children, Mike TV and Charlie Bucket, remain. The TV family, together with Charlie and Grandpa Joe, stepped into a dazzlingly bright room. Mr. Wonka handed each of them a pair of dark glasses and said, "Put these on, quick! This light could blind you." As soon as Charlie had his dark glasses on, he was able to look around him in comfort. He saw a long narrow room with white walls and floors. The room was completely bare except at the far ends. The group of 5 children who had won the golden tickets. By the time they reached the final testing room, only 2 of these children are left, Mike TV and Charlie Bucket. The room that they entered was dazzlingly bright. That means it was very bright. The lights were so bright that they could not even open their eyes properly. Without wasting any time, Mr. Wonka handed each of them a pair of dark glasses and urgently asked them to put it on. Otherwise, the light could blind them. As soon as Charlie wore these glasses, he was comfortable in looking around. It was a long, narrow room with white walls and floors, and it was completely bare, meaning empty, except at the far ends. At one of these ends, there was an enormous camera on wheels. An army of Oompa Loompas wearing bright red spacesuits was working there, oiling its joints and cleaning the lens, in complete silence. At the other end of the room, another Oompa Loompa, also in a spacesuit, was sitting at a black table, gazing at a very large television screen. Watching them, Charlie had a vague sense of danger. At one end of the room, there was a huge camera on wheels. Children, these are the Oompa Loompas. They were a group of people from the imaginary country of Loompa Land who loved singing and dancing. They were imaginary and were made up by the author Roald Dahl for the purpose of the story. They wore spacesuits, which were special garments worn by astronauts in the space to protect themselves. In the chapter, it is mentioned that the Oompa Loompas wore bright red spacesuits, which is very much evident in the picture on your screen. But the Oompa Loompas in the testing room are seen in white colored spacesuits. So these Oompa Loompas were taking care of the camera, oiling its joints, putting oil in them so that the camera works nicely. When Charlie saw all this, he could feel some kind of an unknown fear. All this looked very mysterious to him. Mr. Wonka suddenly interrupted his thoughts. This is the testing room for my greatest invention, television chocolate, he cried. What is television chocolate? Asked Mike TV. Don't interrupt me, child, said Mr. Wonka. It works by television. Now, I don't like television myself, but I know that children seem to watch it all day. That's me, said Mike. Quiet, said his father. Thank you, said Mr. Wonka. I shall now tell you how an ordinary television works, he continued. At one end, a picture is taken with a large camera. Then the photograph is broken up into a million tiny pieces and shot up into the sky by electricity. How do they reach our televisions? Asked Charlie. Meanwhile, when Charlie was sensing some kind of danger, Mr. Wonka interrupted his thoughts. He told them that it was the testing room for his greatest invention. And what was that? Television chocolate. Mike TV asked what was television chocolate. Mr. Wonka did not like his interruption. He told him not to interrupt. Mr. Wonka said that television chocolate worked by television. He also made it clear that he did not like television himself, but children watched television the entire day, and he knew that. Mike was one such child who watched television the entire day. So he cried out, "That's me!" To which his father told him to be quiet. Mr. Wonka now started explaining how an ordinary television works. He said that at one end, a picture was taken with a large camera. Then it was broken up into a million tiny pieces and shot up into the sky by electricity. Inquisitive as a child is and should be, Charlie asked Mr. Wonka, how do the photographs then reach the television? Well, they hit the antenna on your roof and then flash down the wire to the back of the television set. When they reach inside, the tiny pieces jiggle and joggle till they fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. That's how the photograph appears on the screen. That isn't exactly how it works, Mike said. Children, this is a TV antenna. When I was your age or your parents were your age, every roof in the neighborhood was adorned with these antennas. They used to catch signals for the TVs to function properly. In response to Charlie's question as to how the photographs reach the television screen, Mr. Wonka says that they hit the antenna on your roof and then move down the wire to the back of the television set. When they reach inside, these tiny pieces jiggle and joggle till they fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and that's how the photograph appears on the screen. To his explanation, Mike shouted out that this wasn't exactly how the TV worked. "You're a nice boy," Mr. Wonka said, "but you talk too much. Now then, the very first time I saw an ordinary television working, I had an idea. If a photograph could be broken into millions of pieces and then put together, couldn't I also send a real bar of chocolate whizzing through the air in tiny pieces and then put the pieces together at the other end, all ready to be eaten?" "Impossible," said Mike TV. Mr. Wonka did not quite like when Mike interrupted him. So he said in a cold tone that though he was a nice boy, he talked too much. And then, without paying much attention, he moved on. He said that the very first time he saw an ordinary television working, he had an idea. He thought that if a photograph could be broken into millions of pieces and then put together, couldn't he also send a real bar of chocolate broken into tiny pieces and then put them together at the other end, all ready to be eaten? Mike did not quite like the idea because he knew that the real television did not work that way, and so he shouted out that it was impossible. "Well, watch this," cried Mr. Wonka. "Bring in the chocolate, please." He nodded. Immediately, 6 Oompa Loompas marched forward, carrying the most enormous bar of chocolate Charlie had ever seen. "It is huge," Mr. Wonka explained, "because whenever you send something by television, it always shrinks in size. When you photograph a big man, he is as tall as a pencil on the screen, isn't he?" He waved to the Oompa Loompas. "Here we go, then." Then he suddenly shrieked, "No, no, stop!" For Mike TV was standing very close to the camera. "Stand back," he warned. "The rays coming out of it could break you up into a million tiny pieces in 1 second. That's why the Oompa Loompas are wearing spacesuits. The suits protect them." Now Mr. Wonka was all set to show them his experiment. When he called out to bring in the chocolate, 6 Oompa Loompas marched forward and they were carrying the most enormous, the most gigantic bar of chocolate Charlie had ever seen. Mr. Wonka said that the bar was huge, it was enormous, because whenever you send something by television, it always reduced in size. It grew smaller in size. When you photograph a big man, he is as tall as a pencil on the screen. So when they will send a big bar of chocolate, then on the screen they will get a normal sized chocolate. They were nearly all set when suddenly Mr. Wonka shouted out to stop. Because Mike TV was standing too close to the camera, he shouted out to him to stand back, or else the rays coming out of it could break him up into a million small pieces. And that was the reason why the Oompa Loompas were wearing spacesuits. The spacesuits protected them from the rays coming out of the camera. TV moved away as one Oompa Loompa pulled a large switch down. There was a blinding flash. "The chocolate is gone," shouted Grandpa Joe, waving his arm. He was quite right. The whole enormous bar of chocolate had disappeared completely. "It's on its way," cried Mr. Wonka. He dashed over to the other end of the room where the large television set was standing, and the others followed him. Here it comes, he cried. The television screen flickered and lit up. Then suddenly, a small bar of chocolate appeared in the middle of the screen. Take it, shouted Mr. Wonka, growing more and more excited. How can you take it? Asked Mike TV, laughing. It's just a picture on a television screen. Now TV moved away when Mr. Wonka warned him, and then one Oompa Loompa pulled a large switch down. As a result, there was a blinding flash. Here, a blinding flash is an extremely bright burst of light when a camera button is pressed. Grandpa Joe shouted out in excitement that the chocolate was gone, and he was very right. The whole enormous bar, the gigantic bar of chocolate, had disappeared completely. Mr. Wonka said that the disappeared chocolate was on its way. Then he quickly ran over to the other end of the room, where the large television set was standing, and the others came after him. Here it comes, he cried. The television screen flickered. Flickered means it shook unsteadily. The light was not constant, and then it lit up completely. Then suddenly, a small bar of chocolate appeared in the middle of the screen. Mr. Wonka shouted out to Charlie to take the chocolate. He was very excited, and Mike TV was making fun of him. He was laughing, saying that it was just a picture on the television screen. How could he take it? Charlie Bucket, cried Mr. Wonka. Grab it. Charlie put out his hand and touched the screen, and suddenly, miraculously, the bar of chocolate came away in his fingers. He was so surprised, he nearly dropped it. Eat it, shouted Mr. Wonka. It'll be delicious. It's the same bar, only smaller, that's all. It's absolutely fantastic, gasped Grandpa Joe. It's, it's, it's a miracle. Mr. Wonka again shouted out to Charlie to grab the chocolate. Charlie put out his hand and touched the screen. And the impossible happened. The bar of chocolate came away in his fingers. Charlie was so surprised that he nearly dropped the chocolate. Mr. Wonka again shouted out to Charlie to eat it. He said that it would taste the same except for the size. And for Grandpa Joe, it was so surprising that he gasped. Children, gasped is when you take a sudden breath because you're surprised or in pain. So here Grandpa Joe was so surprised that he gasped. Just imagine, cried Mr. Wonka, when I start using this, you'll be sitting at home watching television and suddenly a commercial will flash on the screen. Eat Wonka's chocolates. They're the best in the world. Try one for yourself now. And you simply reach out and take one. How about that, huh? Terrific, cried Grandpa Joe. It will change the world. Mr. Wonka is so excited with this successful experiment that when he starts using this experiment, people will be sitting at home watching television and suddenly a commercial, that is an advertisement, will come on the screen asking them to eat Wonka's chocolates, the best in the world, and try one for themselves at that very moment, and you simply reach out your hand and take one. Grandpa Joe was so much in awe with the events that had just happened that he could say nothing but that the experiment was terrific and it would definitely change the world. It would change the world because people would come to believe that miracles do happen and that nothing is impossible in this world. Dear children, the story ends on this note. What do you think of the story? I'm sure you must have liked it because it features children who are your age. Children of your age are very curious and wanting to know all kinds, isn't it? The story combines features of fantasy and science fiction. The impossible has been fantasized and made to appear real with the help of science fiction. The two boys, Mike and Charlie, are both two kinds. They are contrasted. Mike is more of realistic and thinks he knows everything. And Charlie is still innocent, well bred, and willing to participate in the magical experience by trusting the elder Mr. Wonka. Mr. Wonka is a blend of the humane qualities and is also capable of working wonders by stretching the capabilities of a TV. He also appreciates the good behavior in Charlie. I would like to sum up with a question. Whom would you want to be like, Mike or Charlie? Think about it. If you have any query related to the chapter, feel free to ask me. Bye bye and thank you.